In the home of Magdalena Schalk, and it's the 5th of August. It's in the afternoon, 1994, and we're having a conversation with Magdalena, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother Schalk, about her childhood. She's very kindly consented to talk to us about her childhood and some of her reminiscences. So, how do you feel today?
I feel just fine, thank you. I'm very well.
Can you tell us a little bit about your remembrances of your mother and father in your early childhood?
Well, I'll be glad to try. I'm now 88 years old, so it goes way back, many, many years. I remember my childhood as a very happy time. We lived in the country, in a little village, and my family, my father and my mother and my older sister and myself, we lived in the parsonage, and it was a very large home with many rooms, and it was a very comfortable dwelling place for us. I remember my father very well. He was the minister in the village, in the little village church, surrounded like many of the European little village churches, surrounded by a cemetery. My father was a tall gentleman, sometimes a little bit heavy, too heavy for his own good. But he had brown eyes, he had black hair, and he was always well groomed. I have never seen him different than with a shirt and tie and jacket. My mother picked out his clothes. Once he picked out his own suit, and it was green, it was a dark green, and my mother hated it. So I don't remember him wearing it any more than maybe twice, and then it disappeared. He was a very kind gentleman. He enjoyed his two small daughters, and he gave us as much time as he was able to. He took us on walks through the fields in the countryside, and he explained to us about all the wild flowers and the trees, and he gave them all the names. So I was very well versed in the botany of the countryside, especially the wild flowers, because all you could do for entertainment in the afternoon, on Sunday afternoons, was go walking through the fields. It was very pleasant. I remember the evenings in winter time when my father sometimes took the time to sit with us on the Davenport and to read fairy tales to us or to tell us stories. He didn't have much time, but he took that time to give to his two children. So we have the kindest remembrances and reminiscences of my father. We come to my mother. She was the organizer in the household. It was a big household. We had two maids to help us in the large house, and it was really necessary because we did have no heating system, central heating system, but each room had its individual coal stove that had to be lighted or lit every evening in winter time, even the bedrooms. So it was nice and cozy. It was a very large home with many rooms and 3 stories. The main living area was in the first story, and the second story had the bedrooms, and the third story was a loft, where clothes were dried and things like that. It was a comfortable house, as I said, and we had very, very much company. We had a large relationship, and oftentimes they spent their summer vacations at our house. We also had many outside company, so we were not isolated in the little village, but we had many contacts with the outside world, especially mission fields. So we had, my parents signed up every spring to host a missionary from the foreign field for 4 weeks who came on the sabbatical leave. And so they came with their families. So we had many people for company all the time. In winter time, the relatives came then. And it was usually 4 weeks at a time that we had company. But as I said, my mother was a good organizer, and she had lots of help too. She was a very friendly, outreaching person, very kind to us. She tucked us in every evening to bed, and she kissed us good night, and we said our little prayer every evening the same prayer. We could approach her with every little problem we had. She was always open-hearted, and always she had time for us too. Well, sometimes, of course, she was very busy with the company and with her duties as a minister's wife, because she had the ladies' aid, and she had young people's meeting, and she was in charge of these things too. So she was very busy. But a good substitute for her was her sister, her older sister, Aunt Gretchen, who substituted for grandparents. We never knew our grandparents because they had passed away before we were able to know them. So Aunt Gretchen took the place of grandparents. She was a teacher in a neighboring city, and she taught me Bible stories. She taught me how to read and to write. I can never remember any time that I was not able to read. So I was not taught reading in school, but Aunt Gretchen told me how to read and how to write too. And as I say, she was a good substitute for grandparents. She spent all her summer vacation at our house, always. And when I was too small to go along with my parents on their summer vacation to the North Sea, then Aunt Gretchen stayed with me. Of course, I put up a big howl when my mother left, but I forgot that. As soon as he had left, Aunt Gretchen took charge. My earliest schooling, formal schooling, happened when I was about 8 years old. We had a private tutor, a lady who came in, and she was a resident teacher. She stayed with us, and she taught my sister and me the subjects like math and all those school subjects that we had to have. So she was a very capable young woman. She was very capable. She took us out on field trips too, like my father used to do, and we had our nature study right outside, out in the field. And during the winter, of course, she took us out in the snowfields, and she was a very pleasant person, very young. I think she was about 19 or 20 years old when she came to our house, and she stayed for 2 or 3 years. And my father passed away when I was 10 years old, so we had to move to the city. About my mother, well, when I was 8 years old, or even 7 years old, they could take me along to their summer vacation to the North Sea, which was always a highlight of the year. We stayed 4 whole weeks at a village out on the islands in the North Sea, north of Emden and Hamburg, and out in the North Sea on these islands. And we had a great time. I was always a little afraid of the water, because at one time I went under. I went out into the surf alone by myself, and I was little. I must have been about 7 years old, and the waves closed over my head. And ever since, I was a little leery of the waves. But I overcame that because when I was older, I learned to swim and all that. But I never liked to go into the ocean all by myself, ever since I had that experience. Another episode in my life, when we went to the North Sea on vacation during July and part of August, is this. One time I ran away from the beach to our quarters, and it was quite a ways. It was about a 10 to 15 minutes walk through the meadows from the beach to our lodging, to the hospice, what they call hospice. It was a church, it was run by the church, and it was sort of a hotel. So I didn't like the little girl next that had camped down on the beach beside my sister and me and my parents. So I didn't like her. For some reason or other, we got into a fight. And I thought, I don't have to put up with that. So I took off and went home to our lodging place. And nobody knew that. So I have an idea my parents must have been frantic. Because I went home and I sat on the Davenport, and I don't know what I was doing. I probably was playing. I couldn't have been older than maybe 6 years old, maybe 5. Yes, hardly 5 years old. So I had found my way because I knew we walked there every day anyway. And so I sat on the Davenport, and after about 2 hours or so, my parents appeared. And I'm sure they were very concerned, but they never showed it, except when they got into the door and saw me sitting right there on the Davenport, beaming from ear to ear to see my parents coming home. But they never scolded me or showed any kind of anxiety. But life just went on as smoothly as ever. They never even mentioned it. And they said, I just remember them asking, why did you do that? Well, I said, I didn't like Carol. She was too noisy. So they accepted that, and so I just walked away. And I still thought it was a good idea. Except I should have told, of course, I should have told them. That was one of the beach experiences yet. Coming back to home life in the parsonage, I was always very fond of animals. I think I was shown by my mother that nature and animals, my father too, of course, but with the animals more through my mother because she loved animals too. So we had 2 cats. My sister had one and I had one. And we had a dog, a great big Saint Bernhard dog. And he watched us. I even have pictures yet where the dog, it was a female dog by the name of Lola. Lola sat by the baby buggy with the baby in it, and there was Lola sitting right by the baby buggy watching us when we were outside in our garden. We had a huge garden. It was, the one part was a park-like garden, and the other part was a utility garden with fruit trees and berries and potatoes even, and lots of vegetables. And then my mother's flower garden. We had every flower you could imagine. And of course, we knew the names of those flowers too. But tulips and lilacs and lilies of the valley and all the flowers that we have here too. And I love flowers just like my mother did too. who had lots of flowers too. And we had animals too, as I mentioned. Dogs, cats, and goats. We had some goats and they were named too. We had names. We had 2 goats. Because we had to have goats because my sister, when she was a baby, she couldn't take cow's milk. So the doctor advised my parents to have goats. So we were raised on goat's milk. And those goats, every Easter, we had little lambs. And we named those little lambs, and we had them for about a month or so, and then they were sold, because there was always a demand for lambs. We never asked what they did with the lambs. It never occurred to us. But to this day, I cannot eat lamb roast. And I think it must have dated back to that time. We played with those little lambs. They ran around in our yard and hopped around, and they showed their antics, and they were very funny. And we took them. My sister had one, and I usually had the white one, and she had the colored one, because they were from the 2 goats. And we put them into our dollbury. We put them in the dollbury, and they loved it. And we covered them up with doll blankets and wheeled them around in the yard. And one time the mailman came, and he was a nice elderly man, and he said, "Oh, how nice, you have such a nice dollbury." And he looked inside, and he saw that little goat face in there. He recoiled. I still can see him. But we had always a good time with our goats and with our animals. We were so used, and after Lola got too old, I don't know what they did with him. He probably got rid of Lola, of her. And then we got a little dachshund. Yes. Well, those were. Oh, no, we did not have horses. But we did not have a car. Nobody had a car in those days. 88 years ago, well, you know, in Germany, you just didn't have cars. So when my father, who had 2 churches, 2 country churches, one where we lived and one in a neighboring village. And so every Sunday he had services in both churches. First in the home church and then in the other church, but it was exchangeable, see? And sometimes we could go along, and he used a carriage for that. We owned the carriage, and we had a special shed for the carriage, very nice. You probably have seen pictures of those old-fashioned carriages. And then one of the church elders provided the horse team. And so he came with his horses on Sunday morning and put it in front of the coach, of the carriage. And sometimes my father said, "You may come along." And that was always a big feast for us 2 girls. So we could go along with him in the carriage to the neighboring village. And during the service, we stayed with the family of the teacher, of the school teacher, who had a nice wife and a little girl. So we played with the little girl during the church service, and then we rode home again in the carriage drawn by 2 horses. That was always an interesting experience too. As I have mentioned before, my father passed away when I was 10 years old. He had a heart condition that got worse, and he suffered from it for a year maybe, and now that same heart condition wouldn't have been such a problem anymore nowadays, because now you have those bypasses. But in those days you didn't have that. So he died of a heart condition. And after his death, we were permitted to stay in our house yet for 6 months. So my mother had time to find a place for us to live, and she had plenty time, to 6 months, to do that. So we moved back to the city where my mother had spent her childhood. It was a large city with very excellent school facilities, and so we moved to Halle. Halle is the name of that city. A very excellent university and very excellent schools for children. So we found a nice, pleasant apartment in a 3-story apartment house. We lived on the 2nd floor, very comfortable. We had a little yard in front of the house, a little garden, a little flower garden, and in back we had a big pear tree, which had plenty pears in early fall. It was a comfortable apartment with 3 bedrooms and a large living room and a good-sized kitchen, and it was comfortable. So we had a comfortable life. Of course, it wasn't as large and spacious as the whole house we used to have in the country, but it was in the city, and I had a good opportunity to attend the best schools that were available. It was quite a change from private tutoring to a large school, and it took quite a bit of an adjustment, because when you have a tutor, it's more like a dialogue, and when you are all of a sudden put into a classroom of 45 children in the 5th grade, it's a different type of education, of school training, and I had to get used to it. The whole method of teaching changed. So I was not used. I sat in the back row because I came in fall. It was in September or early October when I made this change from the country to the city, and the rest, the school year there starts in April at Easter. So those children had to be together already for half a year. And there I was placed in the back row of 45 children in the furthest corner. And I was not used to raise my hand when I knew the answer. I knew most of the answers, but the teachers didn't know. They thought, oh well, she doesn't know anything, she never raises her hand. Till it came to the class assignments, and they were probably in the upper half of the class. They didn't even pay any attention to me, because I was just one of them who just came in, and she's a 45th child now sitting right in the corner. Well, it changed the next school year, because I got into a different class. They had 3 parallel classes. I was in the A cycle, and I got into the B cycle, which was a much friendlier class, because they grouped the children. The 45 children in that class were industrial people, business people's children, and so forth. The B class was ministers, professors' children, teachers' children, and I felt much more like home, because we were all on the same level of education. So I made friends very quickly, friends that I still correspond nowadays. And we are 88 years old. There are especially 3 of my former classmates that I still write to. That's amazing. So school was pure pleasure for me. I had friends, I got along well, I got good grades, and I got to the new and different school system. And the teachers were kind and understanding, and as I say, school was fun. We had to work hard. We got lots of homework to do, and lo and behold, it had to be done. We couldn't just say, I didn't have time, or we just didn't give it in, and the essays or whatever we had to do, it had to be done, and it was done. So I got along just fine. I liked school, and I had lots of friends. I took swimming lessons in the river, in the Saale River, and we went to concerts. We went to performances, to the opera. We went to good concerts, because Halle is a very music-directed city. Handel, George Frederick Handel, was born in my hometown, Halle. And he didn't get the recognition there, so he went to England. And England claims him now as their composer. But he was born in my hometown. He even has a monument there on the marketplace. So I took music lessons. Music is not taught in school like it is here. But if you want to take music lessons, you take it privately. So I took, when I was 10 years old, right then and there, I took piano lessons, but I didn't take the piano so well. I don't know why. And besides, when I started with my piano lessons, my sister and I, we got measles. Because when we went to public school, we got all those children's diseases which we didn't get when we were home. I got mumps, I got measles, I got whatever goes around, chickenpox, and all those diseases. Well, when I started music lessons, piano lessons, I got the measles. Fortunately, I didn't have to continue. But I took violin lessons, and I took to that like a fish to the water. I liked it. Well, I still have my school friends. I graduated from high school. In the German system, of course, the German school system is somewhat different. The two junior college years are really included in the high school system. So I graduated there, and then I went to teachers college and got my teacher's education. That brought me over here to this country.
And your sister?
My sister was a very gifted person, but when she was about 14 or 15 years old, she got emotionally sick. So she couldn't continue school, but she stayed home. Sometimes we had a very difficult time with her, because all the emotionally people that we suffer a lot, I imagine, and they are not aware of it, so life is a little difficult for them and for the family too. But we got along all right. She went sometimes to institutions, and she took medication. It's too bad, she was such a nice girl, but that happens sometimes. We can do nothing about that. We tried whatever we could do. I think my mother did, but sometimes it just doesn't work out so well.
Well, what did you study in college? I mean, what were the courses in
Oh,
your,
the
what would be
courses.
comparable to
Yeah.
our high school?
Well, it's comparable to high school. Well, about the same. Only we are more language directed. Because you see, your next door neighbors speak a different language. The French people speak French, the English people speak English, the Polish people speak Polish, and the Russians speak Russian, and the Norwegian people have their own language, the Swedish people have their own language, the Danish people, the Hollanders, it's all a different language. So our school system is geared to languages. So in the 5th grade you start with French, in the 4th grade you start with English. In the 6th grade you start, You see, and you have it to graduation, you have the 4 languages. And Latin. I had 6 years of Latin, and I had 7 years probably of English, and 8 years of French. So it's necessity. If you want to take the train and travel to France, it's a different language. You have to at least be able to read the street signs. But we got a very thorough education in French literature and English literature, for which I'm very grateful, because we are very well versed in English literature, Shakespeare, from Chaucer stories on and so forth, the high school subjects, of course. And we got a lot of math. Sometimes I figure, what good did it do me to learn about the spherical geometry? It didn't do me any good now. But it teaches you to think, which is very good.
Dating? Dating, boys and girls?
No school was co-educational in those days. It was a girls' school I attended, and the boys' school is an entirely different building on a different street, and ours was only a girls' school. So dating was no major problem or major fun, because our friends were girls. See, till we grew up and had our dates, and we are invited to university fraternities parties. And I was 16 when I started to be invited. And I had a good time. Well, just like we do here too.
Did you dance? Did you dance?
Yeah. Yeah, we had our dances, sure, and our parties, and our picnics. And it was all during fraternities, in fraternities. See?
Picnics on the regular?
And of course my mother had good friends too. She had a monthly get-together with a group of friends, like we have here bridge clubs and so forth, but they didn't have that. They had literary clubs, and she had her church activities and so forth. And of course those ladies had sons, and they sometimes came along, and when the ladies got together, and we had our own good times and party. So there was no problem of not having any dating or any parties. And we had birthday parties and all that. After graduation from high school, I remember the day very well. We had our graduation exercises, and I went home, and on my way home I felt utterly vacant. There was nothing to look forward to, no other school, not the companionship of my classmates, not the guidance of teachers. I just went home and I felt empty. So I was glad that only after a few weeks I went off and left my hometown and went to college. And it was a teacher's college, geared entirely to teacher's education, an educational college. It was dormitory type. It was a complex of only, and of course it was a girls' school only. And we slept there, and we had our classrooms there, And we had our teachers who lived around it. They had their own homes, of course. And it was a huge building with the classrooms and the classes too that we practiced teaching. And 1/3 of the time was dedicated on teachers' training, on the methods of training, not the lecturing type only. It was geared to the students, how to make it interesting, how to make all the subjects interesting and let the children take part in it. That you don't preach to them or lecture to them, but involve them. They called it methodology, the method of teaching. That was stressed, because our brains were filled with knowledge, but how can we share that knowledge with other people, and especially with the younger generation? So we had our dormitory. I had to get used to sleeping in a dormitory that was partitioned off with curtains, and we had our own bathroom, of course. Everybody had their own bathroom. And then we had our living room. 8 of us were in one of the living rooms, and we had about 6 of the living rooms at one floor. And I had very nice roommates there, where we did our studying. We each had our place at a desk, and we had our own bookshelf where we had our belongings in that room, all 8 of us. And it was not only our generation, the teachers, but it was a second high school class that was there too, because it was an institution for high school and college. It was all in one complex. So it was an concentrated college courses that I attended there, and I learned many very valuable things that otherwise I probably would have never been taught. For instance, that one thing that's very important to any generation in any age that deals with people: when something goes wrong, whether it's teaching or parenting or anything else, or your relationship to your brothers and sisters or parents, and anything goes wrong, seek at first the fault in yourself. How can you do better to correct the situation? And the fault, and that has accompanied me all my life and has helped me an awful lot. Not to pass a buck and to blame everybody else, but first of all, seek the fault. What did you do wrong to create this adverse situation? So I was glad for many of the things that I was taught there. We had a concentrated course, as I say. And the tests were very difficult to do, and but we lived through it, and I passed through with good grades, for which I was very grateful. And after I graduated from that college, I was sent home because I had attained the goal that they had set for us. And they even offered me a job at this institution to teach the younger children the subjects. And I said I cannot do that, because I had obligated myself to go to America. And this is how it came to pass. My mother said, when I came home from the graduation, high school graduation, she said, "You really don't know much." Well, I didn't go along with that at that time, but I realized throughout my life that I really didn't know much. So she said, you should know a little more about foreign languages, because you are very much interested more in languages than in sciences, like math, physics, and so forth. We don't know anybody in France that we could relate to. We don't know anybody in England, but we know some people, some families in the United States, because some of the ministers that were in the United States had studied with my father. They were colleagues, and they emigrated to the United States and formed some congregations there. So we contacted one of those families, and they said, oh yes, we would like to have her as a private teacher to our 3 boys. We live 8 miles out in the country from the next high school in Iowa. And Iowa's climate is pretty severe. And so going to school every day in the snowstorms in Iowa is near impossible. So the boys would have to stay in town, but they couldn't have their own apartment and do their own cooking and stay there during the school time, during the school years. So they decided to have me come over and teach them the high school subjects and prepare them for St. Olaf College. So I thought to myself, well, America, the land of our dreams. So I came over to this country. I took a steamer. In those days, we didn't have airplanes. So I took a liner, a German liner. It was a smaller one, and it was in November, end of November. I was within the quota, because they had a quota for every country, you see. And I had to wait till I could fit into the quota. And it was November. November on the ocean, in not a very large liner, is a little trying, to say the least. And November is very stormy, very stormy. So it took 9 days to go across. And then we finally landed in Manhattan, in New Jersey somewhere, Hoboken, in Hoboken. But since I was in the quota, I did not have to go to Ellis Island. But they had sent my train ticket from Iowa to New York on the steamer, so I got my ticket already on the steamer. So there I was on the steamer, and to this day I don't know how I ever got on that train, New York Central train. And I drove, I think it was a day and a half, it was a night and 2 days to get to Chicago. In Chicago I had to change trains. I don't know how I ever got on the train, but I did. I probably asked my directions, and I changed trains, and I got on the train to Iowa, to Nashua, Iowa. Little town, right smack in the middle of Iowa. November, cold, but fortunately it hadn't snowed yet. I had to wait for that experience for a little later in the year. So at 11 o'clock in the morning, the train pulled in from Chicago to Nashua in the little train station. And there was a minister with his boys in his old Dodge car. It was a big one. It still had curtains on the side. It didn't have glass walls or anything like that. So the 2 little girls, he had the 3 boys and then 2 little girls. They came along. The boys stayed home. Yeah, they came with their dad. That was in 1926, November. So we went those 8 miles, 3 miles east, 5 miles north. You see, in Iowa, the miles are square miles. You go so many miles this way, so that direction. So finally we saw the church steeple, and we went into the parsonage, and they were very nice to me. Driving through the countryside, there was no end to it. You could see nothing but flat country, and sometimes you even saw the corn that was not, that was still standing there. It was harvested, but the plant still stood there, rustling in the wind. I will never forget that sight. It thrilled me. It absolutely thrilled me. The expanse of the country, the miles you could see, and it was a clear day, no snow yet. So we drove those 8 miles, and to the very comfortable, large, warm parsonage, right on the place. The church and the parsonage was right smack in nothing but cornfields. You see, 8 miles from the city. Mm-hmm. And the next farm was about 1.5 miles. You could see it, but it was 1.5 miles, at least, maybe 2 miles. And the little red schoolhouses you saw too. Every 2 miles there was a little red schoolhouse. Country school, the elementary school. Well, anyway, I arrived there on a Saturday noon. I got my initiation on Sunday. Sunday church. The church was a center of the rural social life, religious life, everything. So we went to church in the morning. The preacher had German services and he had English services, both in the morning. And I sat through it, of course. And in the afternoon, we all, the 8 people in the parsonage, that is father, mother, teacher, and the 5 children, we were invited out to a baptism on the farm. So we went to one of the neighboring farms, which was anyway 3 miles away. We couldn't even not see it, but there we went. And we were served food I had never in my whole life seen. So much food. So much food, and so many people being served. First the little children, then the minister, and the grown-ups, and then the young people, and then the older children. And everybody got more than you could ever dream of eating. It was amazing. And everybody, I think the whole relationship had contributed to it. And there are relationships. 9 children with their own children and the grandparents of all immigrants. See, it was an eye-opener. And it was so interesting to me. It was so interesting to me to meet all those people. And I was more or less the center of the entertainment, because they all wanted to know about Germany and about this or that or so and so. So I'm glad I could come. It was very interesting. And I thought to myself, I'll never leave this country. I'll never go back in the limited space in the old country, whether it would be France or England or whatever. It's different. I liked it. Madeline, I loved it. I even loved the plain and the cornfields in Iowa. And then came the snow. 35 below zero. And we were captives in our parsonage. But it was nice. I had my duty I taught every morning from 8 to 12, and I helped her in the household because she had no help. And I thought, well, that's a good experience for me too. I helped her with the dishes and I helped her not with the laundry. I didn't have to do that.
Did you bring the books from Germany that you were using?
No, we followed the schedule of Green High School or Nashua High School. I contacted the county superintendent of schools, a lady by the name of Hazel Black. I will never remember it. I will never forget her because we became good friends. And every 6 weeks, the high school sent me the papers, the test papers, and I had the boys had to fill them in and then send them to the high school. And finally Hazel said to me, you don't have to do that anymore. You can take your own tests. And so I did. And I think the boys did very well because the method was, well, like the tutoring method is, through dialogue. And they had homework in the afternoon. I gave them plenty homework, which I supervised. So it was really an all-day teaching, except about 3 or 4 o'clock, where we could do what we wanted to do. But they didn't have to do any homework. They did that right under my supervision. And, well, of course, we had English literature, and we had, I was allowed to do every subject except civics. And the pastor himself gave the civics lessons. But I could teach everything else. Which, of course, we had learned all that. We had Shakespeare, we had Chaucer, we had all the English literature that you could think of, from way back to up to date.
The names of the boys you were tutoring, and the family name, and the neighbor, etc.
Yes, the minister's name was Reverend Graber, Graber, and the boy's name was Theo and Paul and Armin. Those were the boys.
Armin was the neighbor boy.
And the neighbor boy was Fred, and he was a farm boy, and he taught him I taught him 2 high school subjects to the last year he came, trotting from the neighboring farm with his books under his arm, and then he left at noon. And his father was one of the old-fashioned kind. He said, he'll work on the farm, and if he gets a formal education, he will never work on the farm anymore. So he didn't let him go to high school. And he was a very gifted person, very nice, Fred. I taught the boys music too. I gave them music lessons. And on Saturday afternoon, they took me to town. The pastor took me to town to their weekly shopping, and I gave music lessons in town. I had 3 students there.
Violin or piano?
Violin. Only violin. And church, I was initiated into the American church life, which I loved. I had to teach Sunday school. I sang in the choir. I was part of the young people's meeting. You name it, and I took part in it. You see? And the minister said to me after a few weeks, he said, you know, we have nobody to teach Sunday school to the mothers, to the younger mothers who have to stay till the smaller children are through Sunday school. You teach that class, Sunday school class. I said, Reverend Graber, I cannot do that. I couldn't teach those mothers who are 40 years old. Oh, you teach that class, there's nobody else to do it. What could I do? What could I do? I couldn't volunteer to do it. I was volunteered. I was what you might call drafted into service. And I just taught them plain Bible stories, the way I had been taught, and it went over great. Well, now that is my school life, music lessons. I had a little orchestra that we performed in church, and I wrote SOS letters home to my mother. I said, I need some music for my little orchestra, like Mozart's easy music and something melodious and something easy. So we performed at services, programs, our little orchestra in church, because I had some of the other farm girls too, and boys to teach music.
So how many did you have in your little orchestra?
I had 1, 2, 3, and Hulda is 4, and Elsie is 5. At least 6.
Mostly strings? Or?
3, only 3. Only 3, yeah. Well, there are lovely little arrangements. Mozart, little Nachtmusik, for instance. There are lovely little Haydn that are easy to do. Oh yes, and it went over very well.
Yeah, in German churches, would they have done something similar in the service?
You mean in German?
In Germany.
In Germany?
No. Church is very formal. You wouldn't think of doing like that. But here you can. Here you can. Yeah, it was very nice. I felt happy. And we finished our high school assignment in 2 years, because it was easy teaching, and we didn't take any time off for sports, no time off for music, for marching bands and things like that, and for physical education, because they got plenty exercise doing farm work during the summer. See? So we could really save on time. And since it was such concentrated teaching and learning, we did it in 2 years. And we were accepted in St. Olaf College, the 2 older boys. The younger one was a little too young yet. So
then what happened?
Did you meet somebody during that period of time?
Yes. During the summer, every Sunday afternoon, after our own services, we went to other churches which they called Mission Feast. The various neighboring churches arranged for mission feasts and invited the neighboring congregations to. That would be especially interesting to church people that I talk to right now. And they collected all their mission money during this one afternoon of mission feast, afternoon and evening. And the neighboring churches come together and give their collection. And they collect a sizable amount of money which they send to foreign missions. So we went to, one time we went the afternoon, we went to a different church about 90 miles away. It took us 2 hours to get there. And we got there and we sat through the afternoon service. We have afternoon service and we have evening service. And we have a good plentiful dinner in between, which the farmers and the church congregation supplies. In the church basement, nice tables nicely set for the guests. So that one time, when we went to that one church, 90 miles away, the mission speaker couldn't come because his mother-in-law had died and he had to go to the funeral. So they invited a student from the Dubuque Seminary to substitute. And the student substitute happened to be Kurt Schalk. So after the afternoon service, we met in the kitchen. He was swinging a dish towel, and I thought, well, I could maybe be of help too. And so he was from Germany, from Cologne. And he had come over here as a agricultural manager. So he worked on the farm, and then after he had stayed at the farm for 6 months, he went to the church, the Presbyterian church, made it possible for him to go to seminary because that's what he always wanted to do. He had his degree in agricultural management from the University of Bonn in Germany, but it didn't do him any good here as a farm worker, so he always wanted to be a minister anyway. And so he went to seminary in Dubuque, to the Presbyterian seminary, and so he substituted that one time. And we talked about Germany, and he belonged to the same fraternity. It was national fraternity, the German fraternity, in Cologne and in Bonn, that I had attended and I was invited to in my hometown. See, it's the same name, like we have here too. They have the Greek names here too, which they don't have. They have different names. So we exchanged our experiences and so forth. And then the minister, Reverend Garber, and his family, right after the mission feast, we went home, and then he started his vacation. And we went, the whole carload of 8 people, we went over to Wisconsin to visit his brother-in-law for 4 weeks on a vacation. And Kurt Schalk, in the meantime, owed a letter to me, which I didn't find till I came home to Nashua. And he sent me some literature and so forth, and I couldn't even thank him for it because I didn't receive it till about a month later. And later on, he wanted to know whether I had any commitments in Germany and so forth, and I said, no, I want to be free when I went to this country. And so he wanted to know whether I would like to marry him. Well, I showed that letter to Mrs. Raber, and I said, oh, what shall I do? And she says, wait, tell him you want to get to know him a little better. And so I did, and then we corresponded for a little while, and it worked out just fine. It worked out just fine. So he came to see me then, and we got together maybe twice or 3 times. So he came to see me, and then I went to his graduation, and we got engaged, and then of course in 1929 we got married then, see. But I would have come over to this country anyway, married or no married. I would have just gone to Cedar Falls, get my American certificate, and went on teaching. So I committed myself to get married in this country to the seminary student Kurt Schalk. By the time he graduated from seminary, of course, he became ordained to a church, to a little church in Lansing, Iowa, by the Mississippi River. But before I come to that, I want to tell you a little bit about when I went home again for about 8 or 9 months after I got through with my teaching assignment here at Reverend Garber's in his family. I went home again and to see my mother and to make the preparation for the wedding and to meet my husband about the place I was going to be, the parsonage I was going to get into in Lansing, Iowa, because I knew that already. I had visited that congregation already. So I told my home folks in Germany all about the conditions, And they knew and they found out that I was happy and content the way it would go. Of course, it was very difficult to say goodbye to my mother because we were very close, probably closer than anybody can imagine, that the relationship between mother and daughter. And she never scolded me, and she always let me have the choice. When there were two ways to decide, she left the decision up to me. And unless it was something that she very wisely guided me. For instance, I had the habit to tell people off. With my opinion, and I thought I was always right, and she says, we had a certain title too. And I followed that advice in that book. And it guided me through life, and it made life much easier for me. That not to think that people should be the way I should think they are, but that they to take people the way they are, and not try to bend them another way. And it has helped me a lot. So she told her that she could never come to see me, or that the financial situation would make it impossible for me to go home every year like some of the German girls do now who marry the military, who go home every 2 years, and we call it home as long as the mother is alive, but as soon as the mother is gone, we don't call it home anymore, which is very natural. But anyway, I went home, and girlfriends gave me, and my relatives gave me, and I took many nice presents home, to America. And then I set out, and I left, and she took me to the train station, and it's always very hard to say goodbye, especially to people you are closely related to. And so I left, and I arrived here in this country again, and for this time it was much easier for me to change trains because I was used to the American way, and I knew where to go and all that in the depot, especially the huge central station, the American, at 4 o'clock in the morning. So some very kind people in that little town offered to take us overnight, because one of the farm girls, Gertrude, a good friend of mine from this country here, she went along. Her mother had said, well, as long as Lina is going, you might just go along, but you don't have to go alone, and visit some of the relatives in the Germany, of your relatives. So Gertrude and I, we set out, and we got home again, and 4 o'clock in the morning. And those kind people, they were the brothers and I, we went to bed 4 o'clock in the morning. And in the morning, we got awakened again. Our men had come, Gertrude's father and my fiancé, Stoehr Schalk, had come deep snow to get their girls home. So we headed for home. He had a car, Kurt had a car, nice, comfortable, zippered car, which was new. So we went to make sure, and he loaded me, and it was the 14th of February. I think it was Valentine's Day. And then he left again because he had to go back to his own services. And set for the 3rd of March. So I had 2 weeks to get ready for the race. In Germany, it was not a white dress and it was not a veil, because I said, since my mother isn't here, I just have a nice dress, and not the white dress and the veil, because she cannot put it on me, so why should I do that? So That's the way it was. So the wedding day approached. Deep snow. It was so impossible to go by car. I don't know how my future husband ever made it with his car. I don't know. But it was a big church wedding. It was on a Sunday morning during the second service. We had the German service first, and then we had the general service at 11 o'clock. So 9:30 and 11. And the whole congregation was invited. And we all turned out. It was a church full of very nice people. So we had the wedding, and I went on my own because I think I went with the minister's wife up in front. There were 2 chairs set up, for Kurt and me. The service was here to us. 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, that's the text. And he preached, of course, and he performed the wedding ceremony, and the whole congregation was present in attendance. There was a big dinner planned at the parsonage, which the young people hosted. My young people's home, they hosted it. They furnished the food and the service beautifully, absolutely beautiful. I made the place cards. I told them I put a little rose on it, on the little place card and put the names of leaders that were what do you call it, the form. I mean, leader was set up. In 7 hours signing room. And after the meal, after the wedding meal, we got socially together yet. And then we said goodbye to young people, and then we were together yet for the evening, the pastor and his family and me. It was very nice. It was very nice. Yeah. Then we went to Dubuque. We went to Dubuque. Yes. In the snow, with a car. Yes. And we
went to the parsonage?
No, we went to the Julian Hotel. Julian Hotel in Dubuque. We had a nice dinner with, and we invited some of the nice dinners. We stayed at the Julian Hotel. And the next day, we had the picture taken, and then there were several things to do. He wanted to introduce me to some of his friends and professors. And then the day after he left for place in Iowa. Yeah. Well, maybe I forgot to mention too that we had a pre-wedding young people in Reverend Father's church. I should have said that before the wedding. And Kurt Schalk took me out. He came down to see me that day, of course, and he took me out and he said, well, we'll take a little drive. And I said, yeah, but he should be home in time for this. It was on a Sunday. And then I saw lights in the basement of the church. And I said, well, that must be the sun that reflects. But he knew full well it was a wedding shower. It's because I never knew anything about wedding showers or showers because they don't do that in the old country. So it was quite a surprise. And they got some very nice shower presents from the young people. So I still have some items that I had from the shower. So that was very nice. Then we arrived in Lansing, and one of the neighbor ladies had started to furnish, so the house was nicely warm, and she had put some bread and things on the table for us when we came home, because it was the evening. So we got home to our own home. Yeah, the first home.
Everybody lived happily ever after.
Mostly.
Two children were born there.
Mostly.
Well, thank you very much
Yeah.
for that very wonderful story, and we'll treasure it always.
Well, I'm glad you let me talk to you all.
Wonderful.
So these are the early days of my life.